If it's happening in New York, New Jersey, or Long Island, hear about it with Joe Piscopo. Mornings, 6 to 10 on AM 970. The Answer.
The Piscopo in the Morning Show. Joe is off this week. Frank Morano here with Al Gattullo, John Tabacco, and Anthony Pope. And we are thrilled to be joined by one of my all-time favorite guests, a man who is as bright as he is passionate, a man who is as outspoken as he is well-read, a man who is as good of a writer as he is a public speaker, the director of Jihad Watch, Robert Spencer. Mr. Spencer, thanks so much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for that great introduction. You know you're hired.
Well, you know what? I'm sure there's 3 or 4 fatwas on your head right now, so I'm going to respectfully decline the job offer.
Look, they've only actually tried to kill me twice.
Okay, hey, you're ahead of where Mueller prosecutor Greg Andres is. He's got at least 2. Now, I want to ask you about your new book, The History of Jihad, but just so folks understand where you're coming from and a little bit about your history, what made you decide to start this website, Jihad Watch? What motivates you? Why do you do this?
Well, I started Jihad Watch in 2003 because I wanted to read it. I had written 3 books.
The Quran.
Well, no, I'd read the Quran a million times, but I was looking for news about jihad activity. And, I'd written 3 books going all around on the internet, looking around for material and going to libraries at the time and so on, finding things in this way. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if there was one site that had all the news and commentary about jihad activity in one place? And I thought, well, it doesn't exist. I have to do it.
And so, obviously, you have, as anybody who's been critical of radical Islam have, been branded from time to time with the horrible, I think, smear of Islamophobe. How do you wear that label, Islamophobe?
Well, I wrote a book, Confessions of an Islamophobe. That's really sort of in the spirit of taking on the charges of the enemy, which has been done throughout history, and turning them around. What I say in that book is that, look, when you have an ideology that is commanding discrimination against women, discrimination against gays, denial of the freedom of speech, the death penalty for those who leave the group, all kinds of things of this kind, you got to be crazy if you're not against it. Now, that doesn't mean you're against any human being. It doesn't mean that you want anybody denied any rights, but you don't. That's exactly why you have to oppose this belief system and ideology.
Every time there's an Islamic terrorist incident, whether it's a truck that plows into 11 innocent people or whether it's a plane that collides into a building that kills 3,000 people, every single time, the whole day, news anchors, commentators, editorial writers all make a point to say, this is not Islam. This is a perverted interpretation of Islam. There's a minuscule portion of adherents to Islam that believe this bizarre, perverted ideology. You've studied the Quran at length. Tell the audience once and for all, what does Islam have to say on the subject of violence?
Frank, in reality, Islam sanctifies violence. The Quran says, slay them, kill them wherever you find them 3 times. Chapter 2, verse 191, chapter 4, verse 39,
non-believers.
Chapter 9, verse 5, non-believers. It says to make war against particularly Jews and Christians and subjugate them under the rule of Islamic law, which denies them basic rights. Here again, it's chapter 9, verse 29, says, when you meet the unbelievers, strike the necks, that is, behead them. That's chapter 47, verse 4. It says that if you have a woman from whom you fear disobedience, she doesn't even have to be disobedient, you're just afraid she might be, then you beat her. It's chapter 4, verse 34. So this is all violence that is sanctioned by who is supposed to be the supreme and only God. And this creates a culture of violence that has victimized millions of people throughout history and led to the 14 centuries of jihad warfare that I speak about in the book.
So you've got this book, The History of Jihad, and jihad, I think we all know, means holy war. What made you decide to write this book now? Why do you think people need to be up on the history of jihad?
Well, just one thing. Jihad means struggle.
Struggle.
And there's all kinds of struggles in Arabic, just like there's all kinds of ways you can use the word struggle in English. But the primary meaning meaning of jihad in Islamic theology and law is warfare against unbelievers to bring about the hegemony of Islamic law. And I wrote this book now because I think that there are a number of domestic and foreign policies that are all wrong because people don't know this history. And we have been basing our policies on wishful thinking and fantasy to a tremendous degree, such that, for example, we went into Iraq and Afghanistan thinking we were going to build democracies there. And nobody seems to have any understanding.
A Middle
of
Eastern
Islamic
version
law.
of Florida with better voting machines.
Is just to be fair, isn't it true that there are more than a smattering of violent suggestions in the Bible?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay, so
Absolutely.
just to be fair, right?
There have been 30,000 jihad attacks around the world since 9/11.
You say in the Quran, this chapter says kill, this chapter says behead, this chapter. But the truth is, like Frank was saying before, 99% of the people out there are not so zealous that they're following the Quran down to those 3 citations.
Yes,
and most
exactly.
people who follow Islam and Muslim, they don't take it to that zealous
This
end.
is the thing about it. There have been 30,000 jihad attacks around the world since 9/11. All of them by people who point to the Quran to justify what they're doing. How many attacks have there been by people who point to the Bible and say that I'm killing people because the Bible has Joshua going in and clearing out a city or something like that? Absolutely zero. And so you've got, in the first place, a big difference of interpretation, that the Quran teaches these things as open-ended commands of warfare against unbelievers, and the Bible doesn't. And obviously this is how Muslims are taking it. And yes, there are many Muslims who are not doing this, absolutely.
Right.
But there are, and always have been, this is one of the things I show in the book, all through the centuries since the beginning of Islam, there have been some Muslims who have acted upon these verses, and they're still doing it now, and so we have to deal with that.
So what about just, besides not just acting on it, because that's absolutely the truth, but, you know, every religion going back from the beginning has had their readings or their interpretations that are certainly less than what we would like at this point in our lives. But there's been an evolution of those religions, whereas the Quran is still from the 7th century, and it's still being interpreted by many people literally.
Yeah, you're quite right.
And even the people that aren't affirmative or active, it seems to me what I'm troubled by is that when there are attacks, those very people are not standing up and voicing their opposition, you know, the way I would if somebody in Catholicism or somebody did something in the name of Catholicism. I would stand up and denounce that person as vehemently as I could. That's not what being a Catholic is about. This is a crazy person. This is an aberration. This is a person who doesn't belong in our society.
Yeah.
But for some reason, and maybe I'm just missing it, but I don't see the Islamic leaders coming out, even though they're not actively engaged in terrorism, and denouncing it. Because with 1.3 or 4 billion people and having maybe 100,000 or 200 real active terrorists,
that's a lot.
Seems to me it is, but it seems also that with the overwhelming majority or a number of Islamic members, they could certainly, if they wanted to, make a real effort to suppress that.
They could, but they don't. You're absolutely right.
And that's what troubles me more than anything, because you don't necessarily have to be engaged actively in something, and you tacitly support it. You're just as bad in some regards.
Oh, yeah. Look, the thing is that they do condemn. All the major Muslim advocacy groups always condemn terror attacks, and yet they don't do anything to stop the next one. There is not a single mosque or Islamic school in the United States that has any kind of program to teach young Muslims why they should reject the understanding of Islam that's offered by Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all the rest of them. And that's a grave omission. Also, we have seen demonstrations around the world, like when they killed the Muhammad cartoonists, 800,000 people demonstrated in Chechnya against the Muhammad cartoonists, and hundreds of thousands also in Pakistan and Iran. But when there were Muslims against ISIS rallies a few years back, when ISIS was really in its heyday, in Toronto and in a few other places, they drew like 25 people, 50 people. They just don't stand up against the jihadis in their midst.
Robert, I do want to ask you, one of the things that I haven't had a chance to read your book yet because I haven't gotten a free copy because they're selling out so quickly. But one of the things that I saw is in your book is, you know, we were all in the New York area on September 11th clearly, I think, stands out as one of the most traumatic moments of any of our lives. And we've known a bit about Saudi Arabia's role in the run-up to September 11th and their cover-up in the aftermath of trying to find out what happened with respect to the hijackings that led to the 9/11 attacks. You say it wasn't just the Saudi Arabian government that played a role in September 11th, but there was one other.
Yeah, it was Iran. And I am very happy that I was able to get this into the book just before the Iranian government actually admitted that they were involved in the planning of the 9/11 attacks. And this was just a few weeks ago. And so it confirms everything that's in the book. What they did was, via Hezbollah, the Lebanese terrorist group that's a wholly owned and operated subsidiary of Iran, they brought the 9/11 al-Qaeda hijackers into Iran and helped them get into Afghanistan for training. And they did not stamp their passports in Iran so that when they went back into the United States, nobody would see that they had been there. And there were other ways in which they helped to plan the thing and make it happen also, which also shows that there's a lot of antagonism between Sunni Muslims and Shiite Muslims, but when it comes to fighting the infidels, they'll always get together.
And on that front, right, clearly there's no greater, aside from the United States, no greater adversary of ISIS than Iran. I mean, they clearly have made fighting ISIS a priority for their own self-preservation reasons. As much as Iran might be a horrible, horrible government controlled by mullahs, Islamic fundamentalists, in a situation where if the priority needs to be fighting ISIS, could you see a scenario in which it's prudent for the United States to coordinate and partner with the Iranian government and the Iranian militias to beat ISIS?
In a certain sense, that's what the Obama administration was doing, because they were enabling the Iranians and their Iraqi proxies in the weak Shiite Iraqi government in Baghdad to fight against ISIS on the Iraqi side. But this was very unwise, because what Iran wants to do is establish Shiite hegemony all across the Middle East. And what they have is, of course, they've got Iran, and then they've got the Baghdad government, they've got Assad in Syria, and they've got Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so if you take the Sunnis in northern Iraq, which is where ISIS was concentrated, and you put them under the control also of the Iranians, then you've got a massive Shiite sphere of control that could be very dangerous for the United States. Now, the thing is, there's no good guys in this struggle, and there's nobody that's good to back. But with the Iranians, the Iranians are actually ordered in their mosques every Friday to shout "Death to America." That comes from the mullahs themselves. And so to help out that regime in any way would ultimately backfire on us.
Does it bother you that we sold $110 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the Saudis, like I say, there are no good guys in this. But the Saudis, at this point, I understand the pragmatism of it, because they are not shouting "Death to America," and they're not actively working against our interests in the way that the Iranians are. Now, that being said, they have spent billions of dollars of our oil money on spreading Wahhabi Islam around the world. And as I show in the book, Wahhabi Islam is a revivalist movement that is very violent, very virulent, uncompromising, and ultimately that is going to cause us a lot of trouble as well. So we shouldn't be sending weapons to the Saudis, but we have to also leverage against Iran. It's a very delicate and difficult game to play.
My final question, and then whatever John and Anthony would like to add, please do. There's a lot of places around the world, the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Bulgaria, Denmark, even France, and I believe even Quebec, where they have banned the burqa, banned the hijab. They wouldn't even think of doing this in the United States. A lot of people say this is a violation of women's rights. It conceals abuse. It makes people who are Muslim targets of potential hate crimes. It allows all sorts of public safety concerns, because you could hide a weapon or a bomb. Even some Muslim countries have banned it. Nobody would even talk about doing this in the United States. What is your view on whether or not the burqa should be banned?
The thing is that you're dealing with a supremacist, expansionist, aggressive ideology. And it claims that it is superior to all other political as well as other systems. I mean, spiritual, religious, of course. And so you've got this expression of supremacism that is the problem. that if you start to allow Islamic law to take precedence over American law, and that is what you have to deal with when you're talking about face veils, because face veils are outlawed in the United States going back to the 19th century, to the Wild West, when there would be bandits with scarves over their faces and they'd be robbing banks, and covering the face in a public place was outlawed as a matter of security. And so if you start to give on that, then you are establishing a precedent that Islamic law has to be established and American law has to give way. And that's very dangerous because Islamic law, as I said before, denies the freedom of speech, equality of rights to women, equality of rights to non-Muslims, and it's in contradiction to the U.S. Constitution and American principles in numerous ways. So at a certain point, we have to decide whether we're going to enforce our own laws and stand up for our own customs and principles or just surrender.
The book is The History of Jihad. You can check out Robert Spencer's website at Jihad Watch. If you want to know all the places where jihad is happening in the world, just go to Jihad Watch. Robert Spencer, thanks so much for coming in this morning.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to reading the book.
Everybody knows this guy. No, everybody knows he can do a radio show. Joe Piscopo. Mornings, 6 to 10 on AM 970. The Answer.